Many of us have recently learned of a simple hand gesture that's being used as a silent cry for help. You start with an open palm, your thumb tucked in, and then you close your fingers over the thumb, trapping it in. A missing 16-year-old girl was recently rescued in Kentucky after she repeatedly showed this hand gesture to passersby as she traveled in a car with her alleged abductor.
The hand gesture was developed right here in Canada, and it's now spreading on TikTok. To discuss the significance of this signal for help and what it means for the safety of so many going forward, let's welcome to CP24 tonight, Andrea Gunraj, the Vice President of Public Engagement at the Canadian Women's Foundation, David Toto, he's the President of Juniper Park, TBWA, and Caitlin Geiger-Bardswich, a Communications and Development Manager at Women's Shelters Canada. Good evening to you all. Thanks for making time with us, for us, I should say. Andrea, let's start with you. How did this happen, and why is it important that it did?
Well, the signal for help was actually started in April 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic, when we knew that there would be a jump in gender-based violence. This happens in times of crisis very often. Things like intimate partner abuse, sexual assault, emotional abuse, these things spike. We also knew that there was going to be a rise in use of video calls. People would use this to respond to each other. So we knew that the time was right for us to release some kind of a tool that would help people not only communicate that they need help without leaving a digital trace, but then also help people be able to respond in a way that was safe.
It's incredible, and the response is just as incredible right now. Caitlin, what are your thoughts on how this has spread?
So we think that it was something that was definitely useful, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. We do a report with Violence Against Women shelters across the country that showed that during the first lockdown from March to May of 2020, calls to women's shelters decreased dramatically, and we believed that is because women were locked down at home with their abusers and they couldn't make that phone call. So this was one tool that women could use to as Andrea said, without leaving a digital footprint, let friends and family know that they needed to be checked in on.
David, what does it feel like to know that this young woman, her life could possibly have been saved by a hand signal that was developed by you and your team, and right here in Canada?
You know, it was very humbling and very, it's incredible when you create a tool and you believe it's going to be used, but knowing stats and the difference between knowing stats and hearing about a story of one person that makes it very real and, enforce you to the direction that you were, you first intended it to be. So very, very happy to see that.
And it's incredible to see it kind of go from a hand gesture, a statistic, a possibility to use to someone who did just that. Tell me about the thought process that went into building this signal and how you decided what it would actually be.
Well, it was like, as Andrea said, it was like beginning of the pandemic, trying to find an additional tool to help this incredibly increase in domestic violence. And what was important because of the video video calls increase as well, it was that we could find a tool that didn't leave any digital trace. So the idea of it was like a hand gesture, just like one single hand gesture, because you could be video conferencing, FaceTiming with the other hand was the beginning of the idea. And then we tried to find what's the best hand gesture, what's the best symbol that we could find.
Andrea, we're all learning so much more about what it is like for someone in a situation where they need help and they can't communicate. The importance, though, of what David's saying there, that someone can't write a message because they might be surveilled by their abuser. How common is this?
Well, it's very common in situations of gender-based violence to be monitored very closely, to feel really under control, to have somebody just looking over you all the time. So it's very important to recognize that the signal for help is one tool. It could be one of many tools that people use to reach out. It's a way to just wordlessly communicate that you need somebody to check in on you. And it's really important that when you see the signal, that you respond in a safe way. Perhaps that's just a message that says, hey, reach out to me when you can. And that person who's using the signal can reach out to you when it's safer for them. And they can let you know what the next steps are. They might tell you that they need somebody to call. They might tell you that they need a service or a support, like the people that Caitlin works with at Women's Shelters Canada. They might let you know that they need you to call 911. Whatever the case may be, you let the person who's using the signal lead the way and tell you what they need, and you support them in a non-judgmental way.
Andrea, I'm curious. I mean, certainly a signal is just a signal if the recipient isn't able to receive that message. What kinds of concerns are there? And we saw that play out in this scenario, too, where the sheriff there said that the perpetrator believed that the victim was just simply waving at people as they were driving. I guess, how concerning is it that a perpetrator might actually recognize that hand signal and then the victim could be in even further danger?
Of course, there's no tool that's perfect for every situation. There will be times where people will not even be safe enough to use the signal, and they might feel that the abuser that's hurting them will see it, and there will be terrible consequences. It's not for everybody all the time. It's helpful for some people some of the time. But what's more importantly than the signal itself and the people who are survivors of violence, those of us around them. It's important that we know how to respond in the right way, that we know what's the signs of violence, and we know how to reach out to them in a safe, non-judgmental way and follow up the way that we should. Most people do not report to authorities. They'll report or they'll say something to their friends and family. We have to be that safe person that they can speak to.
And November is Women Abuse Awareness Month. Caitlin, you pointed out at the beginning of the pandemic, almost 2 years ago, there was a slowdown in calls. How are things now?
So we did see then that after lockdowns eased, that calls did increase a lot again across the country. We're hearing, of course, that there's been a lot of women who have been killed by their former or current intimate partners. I think at one point at the beginning of this year, it was 7 in 7 weeks in BC alone and 7 in 7 weeks in Quebec alone. So those rates are skyrocketing, and this is why we need all the tools in our toolbox to help women and children who need to escape from violence.
Caitlin, what do you say to the many women who have come through shelters right across this province, this country, who might be watching this and looking for that way out, that hand to reach out to them? What do you say to them tonight?
So we encourage people to use our website, which is sheltersafe.ca, and it puts you in contact with your closest women's shelter and their 24/7 crisis line. We encourage people who might know somebody who needs a shelter or is experiencing violence to call their local shelter and get advice. And it's a big, big thing about you don't need to stay in the shelter. You don't need to move into the shelter to get support services like safety planning, like counseling, like outreach services. You can get those supports while living outside of the shelter as well.
Well, I'm so glad we're having this conversation, not because this happened to this young woman, but because it might bring some awareness to someone else at home who might need that help. Thank you so much to all three of you for developing this signal and for being here on CP24 tonight to talk about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.